textile mill, first water-powered paper mill in Georgia. I'm Bob, an archaeologist, historian, been preserving this site for over 25 years. I'm going to share with you some of the details of this interesting place. This place is haunted by history. So much history. Individuals with character and determination, first with the Native Americans and later with the textile mill, the first water-powered paper mill. This is a story that if you were to come out here in the quiet of the early evening or on a quiet morning, perhaps you could hear some of the haunting sounds of the old mill. Perhaps a whisper in the trees, fallen branch with no wind in the area, or even a murmuring of the river with voices and echoing some of the stories, some of the difficulties, the hard times that were here. People lived, worked, and died in this area, and their stories are here. It's evident in the ground, and we'll get into some of those stories. And it's an interesting capsule of Georgia history. The early spelling, Skull for Scull Shoals, comes from the early settlers finding skulls washed into the rocks from a mound site, also called Scull Shoals, about 1.5 miles north of the current village. The other spelling of this site, Scull, comes from the early transportation on plank flat-bottom boats that were moved and paddled by sculling, which gave us the name Scull Shoals. First major industry at Scull Shoals was the first water-powered paper mill in Georgia. Built, managed, Thomas Ligon, Zachariah Sims with the help of the Pascals, filling the need of paper for Georgia newspapers during the War of 1812. Things were difficult to develop, and then the war was over. A loan was due of $3,000. Sims was bankrupt. He had to sell the dream of a water-powered paper mill, the first in Georgia, by the Pascals, Zachariah Sims, and Thomas Ligon. Was bankrupt. He had to sell 2/3 of the interest in 1814 to Thomas Ligon. Cotton gin made processing cotton fiber much easier, less labor intensive, and cotton was king around Scull Shoals. There were white cotton fields blanketing the horizon, which had once been virgin forest, a white layer of cotton fields, all as far as you could see. There were tremendous Georgia cotton yields. Cotton yields in the state were tremendous. 1791, there were 1,000 bales weighing about 250 pounds each. In 1810, there was 40,000 cotton bales produced. By 1821, 90,000. Peter Early, who was the son of Joel Early, early plantation owner, and his wife Ann Adams Smith controlled the Fontenoy plantation until he died in 1817. She married the powerful evangelist Adele Sherwood, and he became postmaster as well as owning all of this property in Scull Shoals. Thomas Boulain was the new industrialist that arrived on the Scull Shoals scene in 1824, and he began purchasing a lot of land in Scull Shoals, ultimately 3,625 acres. He married Harriet Ray, who was a plantation owner on the other side of the river. With Harriet and her brothers, Boulain and 145 slaves control the growth of cotton, the processing of cotton, and the textile mill is developing, and the shipment and sale on the coast in Augusta. Boulain needed workers for his wooden mill that processed cotton into Osnaburg fabric. There was a steady supply of displaced white settlers that couldn't keep their finances going, and so he advertised plank housing for families of five or more because he wanted big families knowing that the children would work their way into the workforce.
That's the raceway along the blacksmith shop, covered with weeds, and in this area it's all silted in. So Sims got his money. He wanted 4 years for it. Developed paper
River water
into the base of the mill. First, it would have been the water-powered paper mill, and then it was the textile mill. Those are supports. There's a wall over there. Those are supports for what is the power that was generating all of the movement of the equipment in the looms that were here. 1830s, 40s, 50s. This water come around a big curve, as you can see up here, and then it would come in, and right where you see that stone right there, that's the axle top of a granite arch. So the water would come in to the mill here, and in the center there was, and it still is buried deep down here, is a bladed metal shaft. The water would just move very slowly in here and would turn this with just a small amount of motion, which could be translated to belts and pulleys throughout the 4-story textile plant that Thomas Poulain developed. This first building burned in 1844 to the ground. Poulain was the owner of it. He rebuilt it out of brick.
The golden age of Scull Shoals manufacturing village began after the rebuilding of the mill. In 1850, all the way up till the Civil War in the into early 1860s, the mill was a manufacturing giant in the region. In 1850 to 53, the mill processed 4,000 bales. The bales now weigh 350 pounds each, and the processing of 1.4 to 2 million pounds, manufacturing Osnaburg cloth from 2,000 spindles and 80 looms. But trouble was ahead for the mill in Scull Shoals. The Civil War broke out in the 1860s. Poulain voted for secession, but his workers, his white operatives in the factory, were off to war, supporting the Southern cause. But they struggled at the mill to produce Osnaburg, this muslin type of fabric, and also drill, which is a plain and striped material. They struggled through the war. There was never a direct union of material. There was never a direct Union assault on the mill, but they never fully recovered. After the war, one of the sons of Poulain, Antoine, took the business forward in Fontenoy Mills, trying to start in the yarn manufacturing. Fire was an ever-present danger in the dusty, linty mills with wood. Not only was there dust that create brown lung disease that they had to deal with on a daily basis, poor lighting, poor temperature control, hot in the summer, cold in the winter, not to mention the moving equipment of the looms and the shuttles that caused disabilities and injuries. Females were 52% of the workforce, aged from 10 to age 39. They were weavers, carters, and factory hands. Males were 48% of the workforce, 10 years old to 29 years old. They were weavers, spinners, as well as factory hands. Some of them were maintenance, machinists, carpenters, or blacksmiths and ditchers. The young and the female were the preferred factory hand workers. But it was a sickly place. Agnes Brewer Pascal was called the Angel of Auraria later when she helped during the gold rush to North Georgia. She was a self-trained nurse and doctor. You often would bring doctors in if she'd learned the craft without being able to go to Philadelphia where doctors were trained. Lindsay Durham was a naturalist, herb-based healer, and he had in 1822, he had a huge plantation near Rose Creek on the west side of Scull Shoals. 18-acre herb garden, created patented medicines with local herbs and other things that he learned from the slave culture. He learned from current medicine, which was very primitive, and he also learned from Native American. He had an entire family, 9 children, all naturalistic healers, serving hundreds of people and beasts every month. For $1.50 or $3, you could have a visit there and he would compound medicine, or you could barter, give him chickens or livestock in exchange. Scull Shoals from the very beginning operated with water power and was subject to nature, overabundance of water with floods. For example, the 1841 Harrison freshet, $20,000 to $30,000 worth of goods were lost, as well as the bridge that was built in 1809. Scull Shoals Mill Village survived the floods and the fires and the Civil War, only to decline, continuing to lose business. Didn't have good roads coming in, didn't have a train. The river transport the water levels were inconsistent, difficult to use it to float product downstream. The Civil War ended the slavery with the big plantation era, and the equipment was outdated. Scull Shoals, at the end of the 19th century, was doomed to become an abandoned, extinct village, part of the Oconee National Forest today. Fire, that was another thing that they had to deal with. Drought, floods, fires were always a concern. The burning of the first textile mill, 1845, $60,000 to $70,000 loss. Silting, the big issue is 1850, a new dam had to be constructed because all those decades of naive farming, silting built up a layer of about 9 feet over the once pristine historic shoals. 1887, another freshet, which is a term for flood,